set for today. And so that'll be the basic format. So, yep. All right. With that, Christina, could you just start us off with a quick self-intro and pass things to Matt?
Great. Yeah. Hey, everyone. Excited to be here. Christina Salmi. I'm a managing director at Analytics8. I have 19 years of experience doing data and analytics consulting, really everything end to end in the data and analytics stack. So excited to be talking to Matt Housley today. I've been working in the industry, kind of like boots on the ground, and just really in our dry run, we really kind of had a lot of great discussion points. So excited. I'll pass it to you, Matt, to
All
introduce
right,
yourself.
yeah. So I'm Matt Housley. I mean, honestly, I'm probably most known with Joe Reese for writing this book. So we just kind of happen to be in the right place at the right time to write this book. And we'll be talking about that a bit more as we get into the discussion here. But yeah, right now I run a podcast with Tony Bear called It's About Data. And I do various training on data engineering and such. And recently been excited to like get more into unstructured data over the last couple of years, which is a topic we're going to be talking about a bit more as we move into this.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt and Christina, for joining us today. Before we jump in, we just have a quick about us slide on Analytics 8. Christina, do you mind covering this one?
Yeah. So I mentioned that we're from Analytics8. We're a data and analytics consulting company. We do everything end to end in the world and life cycle of data and analytics. So we do data engineering, analytics development, AI work, data strategy, data governance. We have over 20 years of experience. You can see here we've got a worldwide presence, 1,000 clients and counting. And yeah, our main goal and passion is to help enterprises become data driven or to really embrace that somewhat overused phrase. We take a genuine approach to it. So before we jump into the conversation, wanted to pull up our Analytics8 data value model because I think we might refer back to it at different points. There's a lot of data out there, and I think it's helpful to think about how different subsets of that data gets used for different purposes. And I think that'll be applicable as we talk specifically about how AI will be using data, how we use data for various operational purposes, for various analytics purposes. So you can see here a visual representation of how the broader set of data gets ingested, then transformed, business ready. So we're seeing the data move across the life cycle. All right, so let's jump in. So Matt, as we were talking about in the intros, you literally wrote the book on data engineering about 4 years ago. And I know we were chatting about this before. A lot of things have changed. I
A
mean, things
lot of
change all the
things have
time, but
changed.
like
Yeah.
in the last 4 years, significantly. So tell us a little bit about, let's start there. Like how did the recent changes affect what you wrote in that book and what changed and what stays the same?
Yeah, so let me give a little bit of background on how we envisioned the book too, because that comes right into this conversation. And that is, Joe and I had been through several phases of data cycles. So we'd seen data warehousing, data warehousing been around since the late 90s. So certainly we saw a lot of data warehousing in enterprises. We saw big data. Everyone was very, very excited about Hadoop for a while, and you don't hear about that quite so much anymore. And then what we used to call the modern data stack, but really that was like cloud data tools, right? Things like Snowflake, Google BigQuery, Databricks, Spark, this whole constellation of tools. And we saw those. And so when we wrote the book, we're like, well, we don't really just want to write about one tool that will be around for a couple of years and then shift. We really want to write something where the principles would apply to all those stages so that it will hopefully be good in the future. So I think we partially succeeded at that, but as you said, we published the book in July 2022, and then ChatGPT came out and I think it was November 2022. And immediately there was a sense like, okay, a lot of the stuff we wrote about is still fundamentally correct, but there's a whole new way of thinking about data engineering that's kind of coming down the pike that we need to think about as well. Um, so a couple of things that I thought about right away. As soon as you publish a book, you will discover that there's stuff you're like, I should have done this a little bit differently. So one of the first things I figured that we should have done right after we published is like, well, I probably should have had a separate chapter on DAGs because it's such a fundamental concept. But it's in there. It's just not organized that way. But then you get into the disruptions caused by generative AI, and then there's a lot more going on there. So specifically, back in say 2023, we started thinking, well, now, data engineers really need to start thinking a lot more about unstructured data fundamentally. Like we've got to figure out how to get our hands on unstructured data because that is where a lot of data analysis is going in the future. It's not that the existing analysis, the structured data, the facts and dimensions, those are not going away, but we need to figure out how to merge that analysis with this kind of new generation analysis coming out of LLMs. As the evolution continued going forward, a lot of tools that used to be really hard, that were more in the ML engineering domain, got a lot easier. So specifically, that includes things like embeddings. I've been talking a lot in my trainings lately about embeddings because embeddings used to be a thing for very specialized ML engineers. Now there's something that probably moves into the realm of data engineering. And that means, populating vector databases, managing parts of RAG, that's going to be part of data engineering in the future. And then I think the latest movement we're seeing is that a lot of the like core coding that you used to spend your time on, that's increasingly being done by automated tools. And that includes things like building BI dashboards all the way to building data pipelines. Now, fundamentally, I think a lot of the same principles are there. We talk a lot about communication and data validation in our book and code validation, testing, CI/CD. Those things still need to be there. And sometimes, frankly, those get dismissed in this era. But that stuff needs to be there fundamentally. And so I guess a lot of today will be specifically about how this BI disruption is taking place and how BI practitioners and engineers need to think about this.
Great. Matt, what about, if I remember right, I think that there was a governance chapter near the end.
Yes.
What would you say would change in the book about governance particularly?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So first of all, once you introduce automated tools for building pipelines and for BI, that adds a whole new wrinkle to governance, right? So traditionally, if I'm an engineer or a DBA or a CDO, in the past, I was thinking about data risks to do with people, and that could be people outside your company, making sure you don't expose data inappropriately, and that could be people inside your company, maybe getting incorrect reports or again, accessing data inappropriately. Once you introduce all these automated tools for BI that are AI based and for data pipelines, you now have to govern those tools and make sure that they're not going to cause problems with data. The other major wrinkle here is that now if I, as a data engineer managing unstructured data, that data is really hard to govern, right? And I really need to rethink my approach. It's not just doing what we used to do and what we're still doing is like searching fields to make sure there are no social security numbers in them, for example, right? It's like you do kind of a matching search of some sort using SET or some tool like this. Now, with unstructured data, you have a whole host of personally identifiable information, of sensitive data from within and without your company that you have to think about. And so we're still working out the details of what that's going to look like. It's a hard problem to solve, but I think in some sense that type of governance maybe becomes the main focus going forward, as opposed to the more conventional governance of just getting the basic data correct.
Yeah, I agree. And I like what you said about, there's a lot of the processes that were covered in that book that are still relevant and in some ways more important. It's just the how, the how those processes get carried out has changed drastically and will continue to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty dramatically and pretty quickly. It's been a big disruption. Yeah. What's your perspective on this, Christina? You've been in the data industry for a while, and so you experienced this disruption from the perspective of consulting, as did I. But you saw this just kind of rip through your whole practice. Like, how did you have to respond to that?
Yeah. Well, like you said, there's been lots of large changes over the years, almost a couple decades here that I've been in it. But none as significant as one we're in right now. This is definitely different. Not just it feels different, it is different. So like you said before, like there are all these booms like big data or everybody moving to the cloud. And there's some fundamentals that will hold true even now. But I think like this is the most significant in that it's making a lot of it's taking away some of those tedious tasks. It's making some of these best practices and governance, like truly governed data, suddenly becomes a little bit more realistic. One of the biggest challenges to adoption of data governance in the past is user adoption, getting it requires business participation, and these people have, everybody has full-time jobs as well. So
Yeah.
now getting rid of those tedious steps, getting rid of, like you were saying, we're no longer doing the really like, hands-on things. Instead, it's more about executive function but yeah, still keeping to those processes. And then as far as how the industry is reacting to it, I see a mix. I think there will still be some slow adopters. I think for the most part, people have gotten the message that there needs to be like it comes up at least in every roadmap conversation. Then the investment in how quickly you jump into it. I'm seeing some companies that are a little more risk adverse and some that are just taking a different approach to it. And I don't think there's a one size fits all, but it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the funny things I see happening right now, so there's all this scuttlebutt about layoffs. The layoffs are real, right? The reasoning behind the layoffs, I think it's not unreasonable to question that. But what I'm seeing is people are actually getting busier, right? Like they're kind of having to chase these agents around, and the expectation is that you can do so much more. But it's like, wait, I'm catastrophically busy, and I'm kind of trying to keep track of everything that's going on, make sure that we handle the basic tasks like governance, like consistency, these things that we've had to worry about in the past. But if you're producing more reports and pipelines, you have to worry about those things a lot more.
Yeah, that's so true. It's making people more productive and more thorough, which could go on indefinitely. So yeah, I think it's important to find. And it's also, like you said, it's kind of like chasing the agents around kind of feels like chasing around, teams of interns, right? Like,
Yeah.
no, that's not what I wanted, doing iterations.
Yeah.
So yeah, more productive, but also it's just a different kind of busy than it used to be.
Yeah. And what I will say is that you're very business value focused at Analytics8, right? Like
Yes.
it's kind of cliche, but it's a real thing. I mean,
Yeah.
if you've worked in data, you've seen data projects that just don't actually help the core function of the business. And we have to watch out for the same thing here. We have to make sure that all this extra work we're generating, the tokens, money we're spending, what we're spending on APIs is actually serving the core functions of what a business does. And so hopefully coming in from the outside and talking to people, be it as like business analysts or as consultants, can actually help to guide them and point out some of the common pitfalls.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some companies will learn the hard way, right? It's so tempting just to throw it in AI and take the first response that you get from there. But what we're seeing is that we still need to guide it with this knowledge of best practices, with this knowledge of industry. We need to know what we're looking for, just like you would if you were guiding a team of interns. Not everything that they produce is going to be production ready. So it's why it's even more important that we talk about these fundamentals that we've been talking about forever. And I feel like people have been like heads down, like, oh, just let me code, right? And now I think to your point, a little while ago, people are actually paying attention to those things now. They have the freedom, the time at least to like, well, what am I going to focus on next if I'm not spending all this time coding?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Speaking of having these conversations, I wanted to move on to our first poll question, which we can gauge with the audience and have a discussion around. Speaking of trust, so how much do you trust AI agents? And I'd love to see if someone seriously answers with my life, but I'm curious. I'm thinking most people will fall in the ballpark of I mostly trust here in this group, but we'll see.
Tried to vote, wouldn't let me.
Sorry, the panelists cannot join the conversation. You are you are up for election, so you can't vote for yourself.
Fair.
Yep. All right, I'll let it go for another 10 seconds or so and end the poll, and we can start discussing things related to this topic. So, all right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results with the team. So, 2/3 said I mostly trust, 1/3 said I do not trust, and one lonely person said I'd never trust. So, yeah, let's have a great discussion around this.
Yeah. So what goes into whether or not you trust the output of AI agents? I think this, for me, brings up conversation about transparency, like what's going on behind the scenes, like how's the business going to be confident, consistency, explainability, and there's I think methods that we could take that back to. But what are your thoughts, Matt?
So I think fundamentally, I was actually recently having a conversation with Mariah Peterson, who's also from the Salt Lake City area and a data engineer and an ML engineer, actually. And so she was talking about the fact that with AI agents, you just need to make sure to give them the right boundaries, right? And that means every wave of automation, every time new computer technology comes out that can automate something, everyone wants to automate everything, right? That's a little broad, but like I think there's some truth to this idea that you see this new tool and you're like, okay, let's automate it all with COBOL. Okay, let's automate it with C. Let's automate it with GUIs. And what we're seeing now is that companies want to put everything into the agents, and it's like, hold on, hold on. You need to evaluate all the risks and all the fences you have around that tool and make sure that the agent can do tasks that are appropriate to it, but also put software, meaning deterministic software boundaries around that to make sure, for example, that it can't drop your database, right? It sounds like a good idea, like, oh, just let it create the entire database and give it unlimited permissions. And it's like, okay, maybe initially, but once you've created the database, there are many, many examples of AI agents dropping databases just randomly and deleting all your data if you don't put access controls on them. And so we really have to think about where do you use code so that you get deterministic results? And where do you use these non-deterministic tools that are so powerful because of their creativity, but also a little bit too creative sometimes? And keep in mind, we often think about the risks of data deletion, but data leakage can happen so easily too. All it takes is like an API call to leak data. And so if you have an agent that has just unfettered internet access and no code boundaries around it, then you're potentially asking for trouble. And so when I talk about trust, it's like, well, how is it set up? If you set it up appropriately, then I think you can trust more because it's like, well, if it messes up something, what's the risk? The risk is relatively low. I can check its work and can check what it does with my analytics dashboard without actually giving it unlimited access to the database and to other things that could cause problems. So what are your thoughts on this? And what are you seeing with your clients as
Yeah.
well?
I also want to kind of call out, I think we might have a mixed audience today.
Yeah.
So like if there's maybe calling out a couple takeaways, right? Like there's something here about it may all seem kind of vague and big, right? Like this whole like what is AI? How should we be using AI? But one point that Matt that you just brought up about like there are new risks that come along with this. So not that you need to know how to fix it out of this call, but being aware of that helps us recognize that we still need that framework. We need some sort of framework in being responsible with how we use these new technologies.
Right. And I'm actually, so Ryan Dolly is here. I'm going to give him a call out because he's writing a book on building BI using AI tools. So when that comes out, definitely check it out because it addresses a lot of these kinds of issues, right? Like how do you manage security and how do you make sure that you appropriately ring fence the tools that you're using?
Yeah. So new risks introduced, but also in some ways AI is also part of the solution to some of those risks as well. Like
Exactly.
we can layer it in, like we can have, AI look for the problems, suggest solutions to the problems.
Precisely.
I see it as like at the moment at least very iterative, right? Like
I
there's
agree.
lots of layers. You have to provide, like you mentioned earlier, we have to provide lots of guidance. We can't just kind of let it run and it's like kind of like a layered pattern that seems to be working at the moment.
Right. And I think to some extent you need to treat it like a new employee, right? So when you hire someone at Analytics8 or at Ternary Data, you always, even if they're senior, you bring them in and you have a process of handing off responsibilities, right? Like you generally, even with a senior person, you don't just turn them loose with all your clients on day one. You gradually teach them about the different clients. You see how they work. And AI tools are the same way, right? Like you need to gradually experiment with them and then hand off more responsibilities, still with appropriate control. And so an example of this would be at first, you may let the agent build the code, but not do any kind of deployment, right? And then over time, you might allow a bit more deployment with appropriate controls. But at first, you might just inspect the code, inspect all the data outputs carefully before you do anything beyond that. And then, obviously within this, if you think about you're not really training your AI agents, but you do things like put in markdown files and instructions and such, and you can see how those react to how the agent reacts to those instructions and gradually increase the level of responsibility there.
Yeah. I feel like this might be a good time to bring up the LTAP point.
Yes.
Just kind of talking about some of the maybe safety nets that we're losing as these process changes. But do you want to, I know that was something that you had brought up. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Absolutely. So one thing we kind of get into in our book is that we've seen a variety of tools that simplify the process of moving data out of production systems into analytic systems, right? Like that's always been a hard problem. And so if you go way back to the early days of the data warehouse, well, even now, ETL was the process, right? So you had this whole tech stack that would extract data from the source systems and then transform it and then put it into your data warehouse. And gradually, especially with the emergence of cloud, that process has gotten just so much easier. What LTAP is specifically is this is a tool specifically in the Databricks ecosystem, which is a partner you work with, that allows you to essentially do direct reads on production systems. Now the data, it's not actually hitting that production system. There are various like firewalls to prevent overloading of data. But the idea is that you can run queries essentially directly against that production data without having to do an ETL process in between. And that, from an engineering perspective, that's a really nice thing. But it does mean that you have to think very carefully about what that raw data looks like because you don't have the intermediate transformation step to clean up the data, to check everything, to get it into the appropriate schema, to get it into a fully normalized form. So that means that either you have to carefully script, say using a semantic layer, what those transformations look like, or you have to give your AI enough information to understand what that underlying data looks like so that it can deliver good data out of the raw data with direct querying. Now, when you do that, it's like the classic trust but verify, right? Like no matter how many instructions you give it, no matter how many semantic layers you have to make sure that you have to check the data periodically and make sure like, am I getting what I expect out of this? Do my sales here look like what accounting says my sales are? Am I conforming with standard reporting metrics and reporting standards within my company? And I think that's a theme that has been true for years and years, but it's just something that's becoming more and more important as it gets easier to query these source systems using a new generation of tools and using agents.
Yeah, I feel like it's because it's becoming easier. You're more at risk of more people trying it without,
Yeah.
without really, there's kind of like this atmosphere of like, let's just test it out. Let's do a POC.
Yeah.
But I think like it makes me think of like this early on in my career, reading oh gosh, I don't want to start a debate here, but like the Kimball data warehouse
Right.
books, right? And it talks about how a natural part of doing data modeling is that you're uncovering new information about the data that the company works with every day. So it's an interesting mix of we're not just modeling data for analytics, we're also like finding things out about the data in real time. And when we skip the ETL or the ELT
Yeah.
part, we're going to be like, we'll be missing out on that. Not that it necessarily belongs there in the life cycle, but it's just something to note, like where are we going back and learning about our data, learning that this metric that this department used to measure their performance by for years is actually not probably the most accurate way of representing their performance. Like those kinds of insights, the agents they're very like, they're not going to talk back to you. So
No, exactly. But that is where, as you said, using agents to try to investigate the data for exploration, which we'll get back into more later, is one of the best uses of them, right? There's actually a mathematician named Terence Tao who's quite famous and doing a lot of things with using AI for mathematics. But one of his comments recently was that you need to think about blue team and red team applications of AI. And red team being, try to break things, try to find problems as opposed to building things, which you alluded to earlier. And frankly, that's one of the best use cases. And it means that potentially with AI agents, maybe we can, as you said, uncover data problems that we've had for years and try to investigate. Like if we know that, marketing's data has always looked a little different from accounting's data and we just sort of let it go and we're okay with that. It's like, okay, but let's try to figure out why that is. Can we explore and figure out where the detailed differences in those query patterns are for what we're seeing on those two sides?
yeah. And in the past, we've had to do that a little bit manually. We can explore the data, on our own and find out like, oh, it looks like marketing's using a slightly different filter on that metric than finance is. And then that's a discussion point we can bring to the business to make that conversation with the business much more efficient and effective. But we can do that better now, I guess is what I was thinking, right? Like before it was like we had to kind of search for it. Now we can do it in a very thorough way. But to your point, like we have to think to do that, right? Like we have to set the AI agents to look for the faults as well as just
Yeah.
coming up with the solutions.
Yeah, and one of the things I alluded to even in some of my posts about this event is the difference between strategic and tactical analytics, which we'll get back to more later. But the reality is that in the recent past, people were just so busy they didn't have time for the strategic, and hopefully this will make us a little less busy. And
Yep.
we'll hand off to Shiro to go to the next part here.
Yeah,
Yep.
when I come off the off screen, that means that our time for
You're
this
like
discussion is coming up.
you're like the hook.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with that, I think it'd be really interesting to hear, everyone in the audience. I think there's close to 50 people attending right now, which is awesome.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear from them on what their posture towards AI-driven BI is. So let me just share my screen really briefly to share the poll. I guess in this case, I can just launch the poll. I don't need to share my screen again. So,
Yeah.
um, hopefully everyone sees this on their screen. What is your current posture towards AI-driven BI? So we have experimenting, using it for individual workflows, deployed in production, used for decision making.
I'm reading through the chat as folks are answering that.
Before I end the poll, where do you think what's your bet, Matt? Where are most people going to fall?
I would say using it for individual workflows, with maybe so, obviously there's a lot of nuance to these
Hmm.
responses. Like when you say deployed in production, does that mean one thing for a huge billion-dollar enterprise, or does that mean like hundreds of things? So I would kind of say, maybe we're getting beyond the experimenting stage, but we're just kind of using it for fairly simple workflows in production or adjacent to production. I don't know. What do you think, Christina?
Yeah, similar. I think that it's mostly a mix of experimenting and using for individual workflows or like ad hoc. Like I think it may be it's being used for decision making in an ad hoc way. It's still like a lot of checks and balances in place, but it seems like a lot of organizations are embracing a pretty good methodology of let's pick a valuable use case to start with,
Yeah.
um, and build it from there. So it's I think it'll take longer to get more folks in production with it, which is not a bad thing. I mean, we like you said, we need to learn all the
Hmm.
guide rules that need to be in place before
Hmm.
it's in an automated happening in an automated
Yeah.
fashion.
Well,
Interesting.
both
So
of
they,
Yeah, I was gonna share. I just shared the results.
yeah.
Over half of the folks said experimenting. About a quarter said using it for individual workflows. 18% in production, and one person had answered they use it for decision making. So yeah, it'd be really interesting for those of you who answered experimenting, what the spread of like small to enterprise, how big your organization is
Hmm.
as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, any comments on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess no, it makes sense that organizations are experimenting in it. There was actually like a Gartner study in last year claiming that 40% of organizations were going to back out of their AI agent pilots because the risks were too high. And partially that's because they rushed into them too quickly, right? Like without fully evaluating the risks. And so I think spending a bit more time experimenting and being careful actually may help you to go faster in the long term
Mhm.
because you really can feel out, okay, what are the appropriate boundaries? Where is this actually valuable versus where is it just hype? And what's our level of risk as a business and how do we protect from that risk so we can keep working with these tools? I mean, one of the things I'm fond of saying in the data world is that data practitioners always think of security as just a pain, right? We always do, frankly. But you need to think of security as an enabler because if we don't have good security, then there's too much risk. You won't be able to play with the toys anymore, right?
Yeah, agreed. There's a comment in the chat too, about going slow without
Yeah.
larger data governance, which I think checks out pretty well, right? Like it's something that organizations have struggled with to date to have enterprise level governance and like to maintain it and have the constant inputs and updates that requires to keep that tribal knowledge in some sort of machine readable central location.
And then
But but we're just finally now getting to a point where that might be a little bit more realistic.
Jenna Jordan says missing option was none of the above. Fair enough. And Ryan Dolly says what he's hearing, it's either extremely slow or it's total HTML dashboard chaos. I'm like, yeah. The
Yeah.
the HTML dashboards are cool, but it is a problem where it's like they're all one-offs, right? And it's like we don't necessarily want everything to be one-off. We want a centralized location and centralized style and centralized standards for these things.
Yeah.
We could maybe launch the next poll actually and start a discussion there.
Okay, that
Yeah.
sounds great. Yeah.
I
So I was
was
about to
able.
bring up another follow-up question, and I realized it's going to overlap with the next
Yeah,
topic. So
yeah.
let's do
So
that.
next question is, what is your biggest barrier to adopting AI and BI at your org? And if the right answer for you isn't in this multiple choice, feel free to comment that in the chat as well, and I will
Yeah.
launch the poll.
Okay, Ryan
Yeah,
wants an all of
next
the above.
time, yeah, like if the answer isn't there, just like Ryan's comment in the chat about that.
Yeah. And retroactively, Jenna Jordan, you can tell us what your missing option would have been. Oh, none of the above, you said.
None of the above. Yeah.
None of the above. Yeah, it was interesting to see experimentation was the highest majority on the last poll question, honestly. But it shows, where we're at right now in the world.
Yeah, I think this one is related to our last, where we kind of left off in the last discussion.
Yep. What's your bet on this one? Because I see the results coming in live, but I know you two don't. So of
I
the
wonder,
four.
I'm curious because I think the reason might be different. Like the perceived reason might be different from the actual reason,
Hmm.
so I'm curious to see. I don't want to sway any, or I guess we're placing bets now. Okay. So,
Yes.
uh, I think it should be governance,
Yeah,
but I think it
Jenna
affects
says
the other ones.
I'm kind of governance as well, but I'm realizing, we could have put some more options in here that were more specific. I'm like, we could have
Yeah.
phrased this a bit differently, but that's fine.
Well, ding, 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 ding. You two both have it right.
Yeah, yeah,
Jordy did comment governance. We did have, I think, 6 likes on Ryan Dolly's all of the above as well, but still doesn't beat governance. So governance, team skills, and change management were the top two, and then a close third for a few of them. So I'll share those results.
yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
any comments there?
I think what I would add to governance, usually, data security is put under governance somewhere. Doesn't have to be, but I calling out data security specifically might have made sense in retrospect. So, for example, I've had one client that's kind of they're sort of military adjacent, like government adjacent, because of the manufacturing they do. And so all of their data is like super sensitive, right? They have to be in GovCloud and they have to handle things in a very specific way. And they're not going to adopt because they can't take the security risk of data leaking. But I think that's true actually for a lot of different organizations. It's like we have to figure out how to make sure that nothing is going to get uploaded to a place that it doesn't belong.
Yeah. Governance for so many reasons. Like in the chat, governance equals all of the above, basically.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
there are, I think like one of the key things about AI, right, is it doesn't ask follow-up questions always. I guess you can, right? Like, but if you put information in front of the business in a dashboard,
Yeah,
people are going to call it out. Like, this doesn't make sense.
right.
And we don't, that's not built into AI, and context isn't necessarily built into AI. So it's
Yeah.
just gonna, whereas a person might stop for a moment and say, hey, this doesn't seem right. An AI agent's going to take it and run with it. And there's some kind of danger involved with that, and risks. It's risks that we've always had, but just happening faster.
Yeah, and one of the risks that we've hopefully always understood in data is that you can lose the trust of the business very quickly, where you build this big data org and then the data doesn't get used because the C-suite doesn't trust you anymore, right? And now you can build dashboards faster and you can ruin trust faster if you want to, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's also interesting that Anthropic, a couple days ago, I think, wrote a blog post about how they're basically doing all their BI just using Claude. But they did say, we have all these different layers that we had to add to it. It's like, well, you're not just using Claude, you're using specific context layers. And in fact, I was having a conversation with Malcolm Hawker yesterday at Prophecy, the CDO there. And he said, really, what they're doing is MDM, Master Data Management, under a different name, right? And so
Mhm.
old things become new again. A lot of these data control practices that we had to work on with human organizations, we now need to figure out in the world of chatbots and agents and Claude. It's like this, it seems like this magical new technology, but you still have to do a lot of the same really hard things to make it work correctly.
Yeah. I wanted to call out a comment in the chat. Oh, wow, lots of comments. I just scrolled back up. Hold on a second. Um, oh gosh, no, I lost it.
This,
Sorry, Aaron's comment about org
okay.
design and end-to-end process mapping and understanding. Had to scroll back up a little bit there. Um, Kind of similar to what we were talking about, like
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
doing the ELT, doing the ELT or ETL. Um, it forces us to discover things about data. There's different ways we can do it. We just have to we have to like intentionally do do it in a different way. But
Right.
similar, I think there's a lot I've found doing consulting over the years that it also helps the business think about their data. So it's like not even necessarily a
Yeah.
data specific, like a data analytics specific thing. It's more of forcing people to sit down in a room and think about how they actually want to measure their department, or agreeing on how they're going to count customer, and those meaningful conversations um, are required to get the context. There's a lot of comments in here about context as well, but how do you, so if you think about context, yeah, of course we want to associate more context and enrich our data with all this, additional information, this tribal knowledge that if went and
Right.
asked Sue at the desk, she would
Yeah.
tell you, oh yeah, you only use that metric in this scenario.
Right.
We want to capture that in a central way so that AI agents can use it, so that people doing ad hoc queries can use it, so dashboards still exist. All that needs to be in place, but we have to collect it first, and then we have to
Yeah.
maintain it somehow. So there's lots of process steps involved there that I think, some organizations have established a more formal, governance process for how do we gather that information? How do we get it approved? Who gets to own, this business domain and say that that definition is what we're going to use going forward? Some organizations do have it, but I feel like overall, most organizations have struggled with it in the past. So I'm hoping that with some of the ways that AI makes it easier to uncover some of those things and then get the approval, there'll be more motivation and more buy-in from all levels to
Yeah.
participate in these processes and establish them a little bit more. That's my thought, at least.
Yeah, and I love how you're talking about actually having conversations about the data, because how many times have you seen, analysts with degrees specifically in business analytics or MBAs or, master's degrees of various sorts who just generate random reports on demand where, someone says, "Hey, tell me how many how's our ad performance on couches?" So they generate the report. And it's like, this is a problem right now. This was a problem pre-AI where the data people are just not talking enough with the business people about what data can actually do. And they just sort of take orders and they become these like report monkeys where you just generate random reports or dashboard monkeys, And agents could just make that problem worse. So Aaron Wilkerson is pushing back, which I appreciate. He says, as an industry, we still lack great use cases for it. And where I'd especially agree is if we're just throwing the new tool at the same approach to data without getting more strategic, without thinking deeply about what data means and what data can do, I'd say, yeah, we're probably just generating more useless reports faster if that's all we do. And it sounds like this is a lot of what you've done in these conversations with clients is come in, okay, you're doing reporting, but like, what are you really getting out of this? And, are you informing your strategy as opposed to just day to day, what do I set an ad bid to?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, like, where does that information go now? So like when we were doing those conversations, it was requirements gathering for a specific
Yeah.
use case,
Yeah.
like for a dashboard, for
Yeah.
a data model that we're building in a warehouse. But now like we need to be able to share that with multiple multiple outputs. So
Yeah.
I think that there will be a growing understanding, and hold on, I'll be
Okay.
Um,
So,
Matthew,
yeah.
while we're waiting, Christina, we did have a question. I
Yeah.
think that is relevant here from Tom Siggers. Um, Main concern is data that looks good but lacks fundamental understanding of what the raw event data means. With the
Yeah.
interns producing dashboards at pace or really quickly, how can we match their pace with their validation processes?
Yeah, and so I think a lot of this is, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, I don't think, and I'll be curious at some point to hear Ryan Dolly's take on this, but I think a lot of what we're seeing is people get these new tools and then they just throw out their existing BI tools. Like, oh, I don't need Tableau or whatever anymore. I don't need Looker because I have this new generation tools. Like, hold on, hold on, just like this question is asking, it's like you need to, the first step of validation is just a cross check to see if you're consistent with metrics you're already using internally. So keep the old dashboards and make sure that that data lines up. And then in addition to that, you need there are different notions of semantic layer, right? So one traditional notion of semantic layer is a SQL generator that's very rigid and tells you exactly how to generate business metrics from the data that you have. It tells you exactly the rules. A newer notion is where you give an agent markdown and documentation to explain what's going on with the data, and then try to have it generate more sophisticated SQL on top of it. But either way, you need to basically you run the query with the agent, and then you also just kind of need to do things. You need to run the query in two different ways to make sure you're getting consistent results, if that makes sense. And you need to do some reality checks. So this can be, your agent generates reporting for the last month, but you do a detailed just hands-on dig down for a single day of data and see if you can get a consistent number out of it. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Christina?
Yeah, wait, sorry, can you repeat the question? I
Oh,
have to,
sorry. So
I have to put up a recording in recording sign next time.
okay. Sorry. Well, at least I got taken care of. So the question was basically saying, how do we keep AI agents from just becoming the new intern where they dig into raw
Oh, yeah.
data and they generate results that don't actually align with your business metrics that you're supposed to be getting, right? Because we've all seen this where there's just junk in your raw data in the application that doesn't translate into real world business metrics. And so how do you prevent that from happening with AI agents?
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I kind of heard you talking about sorry, where somebody rings my doorbell. Sorry.
Yeah.
As we're on live. So yeah, I mean, the context, right? Like we're whatever. I think there's the big debate right now, which I can tell people in the chat really want to get into is the how is the debate, right? But I don't think what's up for debate is the context and some sort of semantic layer, whether you call it that or not, some sort of central place to putting this, because going back to a comment that I think Ryan made earlier on about deterministic versus indeterministic.
Right.
I don't think it's like, I don't know, like, is it possible to ever get deterministic outcomes? I don't think so. Like, I think even if you give it all these guidelines and,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you can get close enough. I don't know if that's, maybe that's good enough, right? But,
I think that's where code comes in, right? Like it's code that still gives you the determinism. And when I say code, that means also that people need to understand the code well enough to understand what it's going to do, right? Like you can generate the SQL with your chatbot, but someone needs to validate and say, okay, is this actually doing what I think it's doing in terms of business metrics? Or are there weird edge cases that will only show up on Black Friday and completely mess up my business metrics when I need them the most, right? Like you have to dig into that really not pretty SQL and see what's going on. You can use a chatbot to help you, but still someone needs to understand that what that deterministic code is doing. And
yeah,
that's where I think, some commentators said, well, AI chatbots will just start interacting directly with CPUs by generating machine code. I'm like, I don't think that's desirable. We still need determinism in certain parts of these systems. And that has to be, rigid logical code. It has to be done the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good segue because we're talking about, what our opinions are and how things should be done. For my next slide, which I will share here. What are your future predictions in AI BI? So I know we've talked about this in pieces already, but love to have a formal discussion around this.
Yeah, who
yeah,
goes first this time? You want to go first, Christina?
Christina, go for it.
sure. Thanks. I feel like it's easier to go first. But,
Okay, all right.
so I was thinking about this, and my bet is on the next evolution of headless BI. So headless BI is not new. Like we've already kind of abstracted, the semantic layer from the visualization layer, and we saw some comments in the chat about like, yeah, you can use AI to generate the visuals. That's not, all my books, that I collected about like best practices in data visualization and stuff. Like it's still good to know those because then you can kind of at least tell AI if you want it to change, if that's
Yeah.
not, please don't use a pie chart. Like you can yell at it or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think like, so that was just like step one. So the next step is that the visualization layer disappears, I think, for most of the ad hoc questions, with the exception of, I still think there's going to be some form of a dashboard around because there's still going to be, in addition to those ad hoc questions, there's going to be those consistent metrics that the company wants everybody paying attention to, that that they've agreed upon, that the performance indicators that department heads are measured on. Like that's not something that's going to change, and it's not something that we want to be continually asking ad hoc. So that's kind of where I think it's going to go, like this, whatever the dashboard is, and it will be less time spent in developing the
Right,
dashboard
right.
itself, but there will be time spent in deciding what metrics go on that dashboard and how they, and who gets affected by them, and that sort of thing.
Right. So I'm going to I'm going to talk about a prediction for BI tooling, and then I'm going to talk about something that I hope happens that we really have needed to do for a long time. And so the prediction for BI tooling, if you look at, and Ryan Dolly knows a lot more about these details than I do, but if you look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant for BI, there's just been a huge disruption, right? Like who's on top, and all these traditional tools are getting disrupted because the tools that have been around for a while, people are a lot less interested in those. I think what we're going to see, I don't think BI tooling is going away. I think the emphasis will shift where BI tooling in the past used to be about basic things like building dashboards, and it's now going to be much more about things like making sure your data is secure and making sure your data is consistent. And then the visualization part will be much easier, right? That the chatbot can do, but you're going to have deterministic code inside these tools that allows you to make sure that your data is not going to get leaked and that your business metrics are consistent. That will coexist with the chatbot aspect, with the chatbot's ability to generate SQL queries using your markdown files and your documentation, but you'll have this checking layer making sure, hey, I'm not giving a bad dashboard to the CEO, am I? In addition, I think what we'll see is some of the established tools will actually reinvent themselves, right? Like we've seen this many times. Microsoft reinvented itself with Windows in 1990, which became Windows 3, which turned into Windows we have today. Apple reinvented itself with OS 10. Before that, the company was close to bankruptcy, and I think we'll see some BI tools that actually figure out that have been around for a long time that figure out how to build a proper AI tool on top of what they already have. But I think we'll also see a lot of startups that are just reinventing BI from the ground up, totally rethinking how it works, and those will be successful. I just don't see the space completely disappearing. The hope part of this is not necessarily a prediction, but it's that we start being more strategic in our analytics and that BI tools or AI-based BI tools help us to do this. So what do I mean by
Yeah.
this? Well, in in combat planning, there's a notion of strategy and tactics. And so tactics are like what I need to do right now in a battle or in a war, right? So I'm going to deploy my troops to this location because I see the enemy coming over here, or we're going to fortify this position because we see incoming missiles. That's tactics. The problem is that in terms of business data, we've spent so much time working on tactics and not enough time working on strategy. And strategy is things like, well, what if the economy changes? For business, strategy is things like, what if the economy changes tomorrow? What am I going to do? Let's start planning now for contingencies so that my business can survive a downturn or tariffs or other types of disruptions. What you see again and again in business is that no one can predict the future, right? Like, I don't care how smart you are, how much data you have. You're not going to be able to predict when COVID lands, and you're not going to be able to predict the 2008 housing market disruption. And you're probably not going to be able to predict exactly when the dot-com bubble bursts in 1999 or 2000, whichever year it was exactly when that happened. But what you can see is a lot of possibilities, right? Like in I'm old enough to remember that before the housing bubble burst, we'd been talking about that for years and years. We've been saying, housing prices are really, really high. And some people were sounding the alarm about mortgage-backed securities and other things way early. And it's like something could happen here. If I'm a business, I should be thinking ahead to scenarios. What if this bubble bursts? How is that going to affect my business? And in the past, analysts were just so busy running around generating random reports they didn't have time to do this stuff. I think there's an
Yep.
opportunity now to really focus on strategic planning and saying, okay, if the housing market bursts, or if there's a market crash, or, if we all see this big global pandemic people are talking about, is that going to happen or not? I don't know. But if it does, how's my business going to react? Or, for example, Netflix post-COVID had these very rosy projections that subscriber growth was going to continue. It did not because people, weren't at home anymore as much. So they could have planned more to say, hey, okay, maybe subscriber growth will continue, or maybe it won't. Let's model both of those scenarios and let's try to integrate that into our future planning. And so Ryan Valley says this is a dream scenario. I really hope, but I hope that we can move more towards strategy in business because I feel like that is actually a lot of the value of BI. We call it business intelligence, but it's really this kind of operational intelligence in some sense in most cases where we're just monitoring what's going on and maybe not doing enough planning for future scenarios that we could do now. I don't know.
Yeah,
Is that way
that
too
rings
pie in the
that
sky?
rings so true, Matt, because like what's the hardest thing to do in data analytics? It's to show progress. And
Yeah.
how do you show progress if you're just spent, you invested a bunch of time building a data warehouse and building some dashboards, but you didn't, well, one, if you didn't get like business input when you're building it, it's not like, but yeah, like there's just so much time in that. I think now we're at a time where we can actually realize use, I mean, I think maybe it's what you're saying, we use the data instead of just spending all our time doing like massaging it or whatever. We're actually leveraging it the way we've always said we should.
Right, right. I mean, frankly, we've been spending decades building up these data systems. And now there's an opportunity to make much better use of them than we have in the past. So we'll see how
Yeah.
that goes. But you can tell your clients that they should be doing this, and we'll see.
I know we've discussed a lot here today, but I know we wanted some things people could walk away with today, so we did put together just like a key takeaway slide. If Matt, you want to go through these real quick and give a quick bullet point or two for each topic here.
Yeah. So BI is not dead, more important than ever. Um, yeah, fundamentally, it's a lot of the same things that we needed to do in the past, like defining the right metrics, maintaining shared context, making sure outputs support real business decisions, and that they're actually correct. We have better tools for doing that stuff now. And so we have fewer excuses for not doing these things, right? And the point is, we need to involve both the traditional data people and the business people in these conversations to make this happen, to make sure, the data people are asking the business people, like, what metrics should we be collecting? How should we think about fraud? How should we think about accounting? Embrace but verify. Speed must be followed by trust. And I think there's even a case to be made here that you kind of slow down to go fast. Like you keep experimenting to make sure that you're secure and that your metrics are correct so that when you do deliver to the business, they can actually trust you. Validation and governance, like the red team aspects, I think that is just kind of an untapped aspect of this. I mean, some people are doing this, but it's really, really critical. You use AI to build dashboards, but you also use AI to build tests, to test for consistency and also to test against the existing metrics and dashboards that you have. Security will be critical in AI and or in BI. And I want to cite here a Gartner study I think I mentioned earlier, which is that 40% they said in 2025 that 40% of these agentic projects were going to fail because they hadn't mapped out costs appropriately, they hadn't mapped out business value, and the third one was they were going to find security risks that would cause them to pull back. And so the more we focus on security up front, the less we'll have that third point being a problem, right? Will be with less risk, we can actually move faster if we have the appropriate guardrails around things to make sure that you're not going to have a security risk with critical data that will affect your business. I mean, we've seen so many disruptive data leaks over the last, say, 10 years, and we've got to take that risk even more seriously now because agents do introduce a new risk surface that has to be contained in order for us to realize their full potential.
That's great. I kind of want to add one more, Shiro.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just
I
because
know
it
we
came up a lot. It came up a lot in our talk today, and I think that's like bringing the people back in, right, to the discussion. Like that came up multiple
Yes.
times in our discussion, and maybe a takeaway there is like, I mean, yeah, AI is smart and it can take all this knowledge from all industry wide, but it still doesn't like people enrich data. People working at the organization, people walking the shop floor who know actually how that production line works. Like people enrich the data, and if we take them out of the discussion, we just leave it up to AI, we're missing out on some significant value there.
Yeah. Yeah, agree. I mean, at least for now, at least for now, businesses are still built for people, right? We still sell things
Sure.
to people. Maybe someday that won't be true. I don't look forward to that. That sounds very dystopian to me. So yeah, focus on the
That's
people
a
in your business.
separate webinar. We're talking
Yep.
sci-fi.
I did see one question on here from Mike about should there be a case for firm-wide dashboards and ad hoc reporting? Firm-wide are supposed to be strict with governance and data sources, etc. Ad hoc allows a light to be shined on fringe data points that warrant exploration. So just seeing if you're seeing this in the industry, I guess, might be a really good question for both of you since you've dealt with many different orgs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you need both. And I think what Ryan was alluding to earlier is that you can't let you can't assume that you suddenly don't need standardized reporting just because you have everyone can do it ad hoc, right? Like you really do need standards so that people can be looking at the same metrics globally. But ad hoc is where you do things like strategic planning. If you don't have ad hoc, then you're not looking toward the future and you're not looking for new opportunities, I feel like.
Amazing.
Yeah, I hit on this when we do data governance enablement with customers, kind of talking about how governance has changed over the years, like how because data has changed, right? Data volumes, velocity, how we use data, who uses data, it's all changed. So we need to change the way we think about governance. And in the past, like when, it was more realistic to think, oh, we're going to govern everything. We're gonna like everything needs
Right,
to be
right.
approved and blessed before it goes out the door. And as data grew, we realized that that is not real. Not only is it not realistic, it's holding the business back and they will find a way, right? Like that's where we get like shadow IT and all these things because
Yeah.
they need the data. So I think what we've come to this compromise is that we need to have those two different ones, right? There needs to be the less governed that information that's available faster, but we're very intentional and direct about what the expectations should be about that data and how it should be used. And that can show itself in different ways, depending on how we organize, and structure it at different organizations.
Yeah, yeah, it's just like software projects where you think of initially you're in the dev mode and then you get into stage where it's pre-production, it's not quite deployed yet. And same thing, when you're doing exploratory analysis, you don't expect to have that same level of governance, but when you actually find something that's valuable, then you need to double check it before it goes out to executives and do all the cross-checking and everything
Yeah,
else. Yeah,
like
like you
doing
don't, yeah.
a rapid prototyping. I think we used to use that phrase a little bit too.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's absolutely a good term here. And yeah, to your point, you don't want to stop exploration ever, right? Like
Mm.
you do want to stop exploration that causes private information risks. You want to have enough security to prevent that, but you want exploration of the data and then validate it as you go along. Yeah.
Yep. Speaking of validation, I think Mike, you're getting some extra validation to support both those projects from the chat too. We are at time though. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So just a quick thank you to Matthew. Thank you for joining us today. Christina, thank you for joining
Thank
us today.
you.
It's been a really good discussion. This discussion today was brought to you by Analytics8. We are going to continue to host these live discussions and live webinars in the future. So please be on the lookout from on email or from on social about upcoming events. So we're going to have a lot more of these coming up. And thank you so much for joining again today.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone, and thanks
everyone.
for all the chat. That was great. Thank you, Matt.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. That was awesome.
That was
All right.
fun.
I'm going to end this thing and everyone have a great, amazing day.
Take
Cheers.
care, everyone.
Bye bye.